You're throwing your life away. My father's voice boomed through the house, shaking the walls as if they themselves disapproved of me. Do you think you're special? That you're gonna be some kind of rock star? I stood in the living room, my fingers tightening around the neck of my guitar. My mother sat on the couch, her arms crossed so tightly that it looked like she was holding herself together. She wasn't shouting like my father, but the disappointment in her eyes was even worse. I don't think I'm special, I shot back, my voice steady but my heart pounding. I just know what I want. And it's not law school. Dad scoffed, shaking his head like I was some kind of idiot. Music is a hobby, Daniel. A hobby. You're not going to waste your life on this fantasy. Fantasy. That word stung more than I wanted to admit. Music wasn't some daydream to me, it was the only thing that ever made sense. The first time I picked up a guitar at 12, it was like something clicked into place inside me. While other kids worried about getting into Ivy League schools, all I could think about was writing songs and playing in front of a real audience one day. But my parents never saw it that way. They saw my guitar as a distraction, a phase, something that would eventually fade away. They tolerated it when I was a kid, but the moment I turned 16 and told them I wasn't going to follow the path they had planned for me, the gloves came off. You think you're so mature, Dad continued, pacing like he was gearing up for a final blow. If you won't listen to us, then get out. You want to be a musician? Go do it in the real world and see how far you get. I felt my stomach drop. What? You heard me, he snapped. Pack your things and get out of my house. I looked at my mom, waiting for her to say something. Anything. Maybe to tell him he was being too harsh. That I was still their son. That they wouldn't just throw me out like some unwanted guest. But she didn't. She just looked away. Something inside me broke right then. I had always known they didn't support me, but I never thought they'd actually abandon me. I took a deep breath, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. Fine. I turned on my heel and walked to my room, slamming the door behind me. My hands shook as I shoved clothes into a backpack, grabbing the few things that mattered, my notebook filled with lyrics, my worn-out sneakers, and of course, my guitar. By the time I was at the front door, my dad was still standing in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, expression stone-cold. My mom wouldn't even look at me. This is your choice, he said. I let out a hollow laugh. No. This is yours. And with that, I stepped out into the night, the weight of their rejection pressing down on me like a collapsing ceiling. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what was next. All I knew was that I had nothing left except for my music. And that would have to be enough. The first night was the worst. I sat on a bench outside a closed diner, my guitar case on the ground beside me. The streetlights buzzed, flickering like they might give out at any second. My stomach was empty, my hands were freezing, and my head wouldn't shut up. I could still hear my dad's voice, still see my mom looking away like I wasn't even her son. Maybe they expected me to come crawling back, begging for another chance to follow their stupid blueprint for my life. Maybe they thought I'd give up the moment things got hard. I refused. I spent the first few days bouncing between public parks and bus stops, trying to figure out how to survive. The city wasn't kind to people like me, kids with nowhere to go and no money to their name. But I had one thing that kept me from completely falling apart. Music. By the end of the first week, I started playing on street corners. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. My stomach ached constantly, and the little bit of money I had saved from working at a record store before getting kicked out was already gone. So, I did the only thing I knew how to do, I played. The first time, I set up on a busy sidewalk downtown. My hands were shaking when I pulled my guitar out of its case. I wasn't even sure I'd be able to get through a full song, but I took a deep breath and started strumming. People walked past without even looking at me. A few slowed down, but most didn't care. It wasn't until I started singing that things changed. I played a song I had written months ago, back when I still had a home. It was about feeling trapped, about wanting more, about knowing you were meant for something bigger even when no one else believed it. My voice cracked a little, and my fingers were stiff from the cold, but I poured everything I had into it. And then, something amazing happened. A man in a suit stopped. He listened for a few moments, then reached into his pocket and dropped a few crumpled bills into my open guitar case. It wasn't much. Maybe $5. But it felt like 1,000. That $5 meant food. It meant I had something to show for all the pain, for all the nights spent sleeping on benches or under awnings when it rained. It meant I wasn't just some kid wasting his time. So, I kept playing. Every single day, I set up in different parts of the city, learning which spots had the best foot traffic. Some days, I barely made enough to eat. Other days, I got lucky, someone would drop in a 10 or a 20, and I'd be able to buy a real meal instead of just scraping by on cheap snacks from gas stations. At night, I crashed wherever I could. Sometimes it was a shelter, sometimes it was an abandoned building, and sometimes it was just a doorway with a cardboard box as a makeshift mattress. It wasn't easy, but I never thought about going back. I met other street musicians, people who had been doing this for years. They taught me how to project my voice better, how to read a crowd, how to switch up my setlist depending on who was walking by. I learned fast. I had to. Then, one night, everything changed. I was playing outside a coffee shop that stayed open late. The place had a tiny stage inside where local musicians sometimes performed, but I wasn't good enough to get in yet. So, I did what I always did, I played outside, hoping someone would throw a few bucks my way. Halfway through my second song, a guy in his 20s stopped to listen. He had messy hair, a leather jacket, and a cigarette dangling from his lips. He wasn't like the usual business people who tossed me change out of pity. He actually seemed interested. When I finished the song, he grinned. "You got a hell of a voice, man." Thanks, I said, caught off guard. He pointed at my guitar. "You write your own stuff?" I nodded. "You ever think about recording?" A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Yeah, every damn day. But, recording studios aren't exactly free." The guy smirked and pulled a business card from his pocket. "I work at a small studio a few blocks from here. We let people record cheap if they've got something special." He tapped the card against my guitar. "And I think you do." I stared at the card, my heart pounding. This was it. A real shot. Maybe my parents thought I was wasting my life, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The first time I stepped into that recording studio, I felt like I had walked into a different world. The place was small, barely more than a few cramped rooms with soundproofing slapped onto the walls, but to me, it might as well have been Abbey Road. The guy from the coffee shop, his name was Jesse, introduced me to his friend, who ran the studio. "This is Mike," he said. "If he thinks you're worth his time, you're in." Mike was a gruff-looking dude with permanent stubble and a cigarette that never seemed to leave his fingers. He leaned back in his chair, eyeing me like I was some stray dog Jesse had dragged in. "You play?" Without a word, I pulled out my guitar and started strumming. I played the song that had made the businessman stop that night on the street, the one about feeling trapped. By the time I hit the chorus, Jesse was nodding along, and even Mike had stopped scrolling on his phone. When I finished, Mike exhaled a long stream of smoke and said, "Yeah. You got something." That was it. That was all I needed. Over the next few months, I poured everything I had into recording. The studio wasn't free, but Mike cut me a deal. He'd let me use the space after hours if I helped out during the day, cleaning up, setting up equipment, running coffee. I didn't care. I would have scrubbed toilets if it meant getting my music recorded. Then, somehow, the impossible happened. One of my songs blew up. Jesse had a friend who worked at an indie radio station, and he managed to get them to play my track one night. From there, things snowballed. People started sharing it online. I got messages from strangers telling me my song had hit them in ways I never could have imagined. And then, the record labels came knocking. It was all a blur. One second, I was playing on street corners, the next, I was signing a contract, stepping into professional studios, and playing to actual crowds instead of passing pedestrians. The money came fast. The fame, faster. And that's when my parents decided they wanted me back. I was in the middle of my first major tour when it happened. I had just finished playing a sold-out show in Chicago, my biggest crowd yet. As I was walking backstage, sweaty and exhausted, my manager caught up with me. Daniel, he said carefully. There's some people asking to see you. I frowned. Who? He hesitated, then handed me his phone. I stared at the screen. A text message. Danny. It's Mom. Please call me. For a long moment, I just stood there. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Had fantasized about them finally realizing they were wrong, about them apologizing, telling me they regretted everything. But deep down, I knew that wasn't why they were reaching out. They wanted something. Against my better judgment, I called. The second she picked up, my mother's voice was dripping with forced warmth. Danny. Oh, sweetheart, it's been so long. How are you? I should have hung up right there. I'm fine, I said flatly. Why are you calling? She sighed, as if I had hurt her feelings. Do I need a reason to check on my own son? I didn't say anything. Then, she got to the real reason. Things have been hard, Danny. Your father lost his job a while back, and we've been struggling. I didn't want to ask, but we could really use some help right now. There it was. They didn't call when I was sleeping on benches. They didn't call when I was starving, playing on the street for scraps. They didn't care about me when I had nothing. But now that I had everything? Now, suddenly, they were checking in. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around the phone. You kicked me out, I said, my voice cold. You didn't care if I lived or died. That's not true, she said quickly. Your father, he was just trying to push you to be responsible. We never stopped loving you, Danny. I let out a humorless laugh. Right. You love me now that I have money. There was silence on the other end. That told me everything I needed to know. I have to go, I said. Don't call me again. Danny, please. I hung up. For a few minutes, I just stood there, my chest tight. Then Jesse walked in, grinning. Dude, we're heading to the after party. You coming? I took a deep breath, forcing all the emotions down. Yeah, I said. Let's go. That night, I played the best damn set of my life. The thing about success is that it turns you into a magnet. People who once ignored you suddenly want to be your best friend. Strangers act like they've known you forever. And the people who threw you away? They come crawling back like none of it ever happened. My parents tried calling me again. And again. And again. At first, I ignored them. I blocked their numbers, their emails. But they didn't stop. They started leaving messages with my management team, telling them it was urgent. That family was more important than old grudges. Old grudges. As if getting kicked out at 16, nearly starving on the streets, and being told my dreams were worthless was just a minor misunderstanding. Then, the worst thing happened. They showed up. I was back in my hometown for the first time in years, headlining a massive festival. A full-circle moment, playing to tens of thousands of people just miles from where I used to sleep in bus stations. The show was perfect. The energy, the crowd, the way they sang my lyrics back to me like gospel. I was riding the high of it when security caught me backstage. There's a couple insisting they know you, one of them said. Said they're your family? I didn't even have to ask who. My hands curled into fists. I don't want to see them. But then the guy hesitated. They, told some of the press outside that they're your parents. That they're here to support you. Of course they did. They weren't just trying to talk to me. They were trying to make a scene. To get their sob story out there before I could shut it down. Fine. Two could play that game. I turned to my manager. Get a couple of press people in here. I want cameras rolling. 5 minutes later, I walked into the lounge where my parents were waiting. My father was in his usual stiff posture, but there was something desperate about the way he was holding himself. My mother gave me a watery smile, like she actually expected a hug. I stopped a few feet away, crossing my arms. You wanted to see me? Mom stepped forward. Danny, honey. Don't call me that, I snapped. Her smile faltered. Dad cleared his throat. We just wanted to talk. We're proud of you, son. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Proud? Since when? My voice echoed in the quiet room. The cameras were rolling. I made sure of that. You weren't proud when I picked up a guitar, I said. You weren't proud when I begged you to believe in me. And you sure as hell weren't proud when you kicked me out. Dad's jaw tightened. We were trying to push you to do better. No. You wanted me to be what you wanted. And when I refused, you threw me away like garbage. They had no excuse for that. And they knew it. Mom sniffled. Danny, please. We're family. I tilted my head. Funny. I don't remember family abandoning me when I had nothing. But now that I have everything, here you are. Dad's face flushed red. That's not fair. I let out another laugh. Fair? Fair? Let me tell you what's not fair. It's not fair that I had to sleep on the damn streets while you sat in your comfortable house pretending I didn't exist. It's not fair that you only remember me now that I have money. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. You didn't want a son. You wanted an investment. And when it didn't pay off the way you wanted, you cut your losses. Silence. A long, heavy silence. I turned to the cameras. These people, I gestured to my parents, are not my family. They were never my family. Family doesn't abandon you. Family doesn't only show up when it's convenient. I looked my father in the eye one last time. We're done. Then I walked out, leaving them with nothing but the cameras and their own guilt. That interview went viral. The internet ripped them apart. Every news outlet ran with the story Rockstar rejects parents who abandoned him. They had tried to use my fame to their advantage, and all it did was expose them to the world. I didn't feel bad. They had made their choice years ago. And I had finally made mine. A few weeks after the festival, I got one last message from them. It wasn't a call. Not another desperate voicemail or a fake apology. This time, it was a letter. A real, handwritten letter, delivered to my management's office. They debated whether or not to give it to me, but in the end, curiosity won. I shouldn't have read it. But I did. Danny. I know you don't want to hear from us anymore, but after everything that happened, I needed to try one last time. Your father and I watched that interview. We saw the way people turned against us. Maybe we deserved it. I won't make excuses for how things happened. We should have supported you. We should have listened. But it's not as simple as you think. We were scared, Danny. Scared that you were throwing away your future. That you would end up a failure, struggling your whole life. We wanted the best for you, even if we didn't show it the right way. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for anything, except for you to understand that we never stopped loving you. I wish things had been different. No matter what, you'll always be our son. Mom. I stared at the letter for a long time. Maybe part of it was true. Maybe, in some twisted way, they really had thought they were doing what was best. But fear doesn't justify what they did. You don't push someone out of your life because you're scared. You don't abandon your own child because their dream doesn't match yours. They had a choice back then. And they had chosen to leave me alone in the world. But now, for the first time in my life, I had a choice too. And I chose to be done. I didn't write back. I didn't call. I didn't need to. I wasn't that 16-year-old kid anymore, standing in the doorway of a house that was never really a home. I wasn't begging for their approval or their love. I had made it without them. And I would keep going without them. A year passed. A year of sold-out shows, awards, new albums, and finally having everything I once thought was impossible. But something strange happened along the way. The more successful I became, the less I thought about them. At first, I expected their absence to leave some kind of hole in me, some empty space where my family should have been. But as time went on, I realized that space had already been filled. By my music. By my band. By the people who had supported me when no one else did. Jesse, who had gotten me into the studio. Mike, who had let me record when I was just some street kid with a guitar. My manager, my fans, hell, even the guy who had dropped $5 into my case that night so I could eat. They were my real family. Not the people who abandoned me. Not the people who only came back when they needed something. One night, after a concert in LA, I stood on the hotel balcony, looking out at the city. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, scrolling past dozens of unread messages. Press requests, industry people, collaborations. My life had become bigger than I ever imagined. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I saw my mother's name. One last message. I stared at it for a long time. Then, without reading it, I deleted it. And just like that, the past was gone. I took a deep breath, set my phone down, and grabbed my guitar. I had a new song to write. A song about freedom. About finally letting go. About moving forward without them.